First of all, it's a pleasure being here. And, Rapam would speak about a brekel of Torah, a crumb of Torah, how much there is in every Yediyah in Torah. I'd like to share with you a brekel of Torah, which is really the sugya of Besamim on Matoi Shabbos at Havdala. It's a Yom Tov as well. And I call it a brekel of Torah because it seems to be a simple sugya, but it's a fascinating sugya, as how one Yediyah gives us so much insight into determining halacha l'maisa on a practical level. And I also think it's appropriate as we prepare for Shavuos to Mekabel Torah. You have to appreciate what Torah is. This is every brekel, every yediyah has tile halachas, so many halachas, as we'll see today. The halachas of someone who's unable to smell can make a bracha for his family. If someone didn't get the psalm, can make you to make a bracha after Havdalah, Matzah Yom Kippur, Matzah Tisha B'Av. A number of halachas, all based on a clarification of one brekel Torah, one simple yediyah. And that is the following seemingly simple
before
question.
the Rav stops, if the Rav can move back.
What?
If the Rav can just move back.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, better. Thank you, Rich. Go ahead.
You're welcome, my pleasure. So the question is very simple. Why do we take besamim for Havdalah? In other words, I understand it's not a bracha levatala because in the worst scenario, you make a bracha and you smell, it's a berchas hanenin. But then again, first of all, we should know why we do things. We're not robots, we're not machines. We have to know why we smell and have besamim every Matzah Shabbos. But there's a more halachic question that we have to determine, and that is, let's remember our location, Rabbi is saying. We're in the middle of Havdalah. We said, we did not yet drink the wine because we have to finish Havdalah. You can't put any bracha just for the fun of it after Gafen, because that would constitute a hefsek between the Gafen and the subsequent drinking. Now, of course, the Havdalah bracha that we say afterwards is not a hefsek because that belongs there. The Ner bracha, we'll soon see, belongs there. But why does Besamim not constitute a hefsek? It's a valid berchas hanenin, and the bracha took effect. You smelled it, but that's a hefsek in the Havdalah. In fact, there's no question about it. The halacha says this in Reish Tzadik Ches. If someone made a bracha on a pasala ner, now you'll learn Hilchos ner Havdalah, you'll see there are certain ners that are pasal. If he made a bracha on a pasala ner, not only it's a bracha levatala, but he has to repeat the gafen on the wine, because the pasala berchas ner is a hefsek between the gafen and the drinking. If someone would make a bracha on lightning during Havdalah, it presumably would be a hefsek in the Havdalah. So why isn't berchas besamim a hefsek? True, it's the berchas hanenin, but why is its place there, and why doesn't it constitute a hefsek? So the truth is, we do know that ner is part of Havdalah, and that's based on a Gemara Daf Nun Daled and Psachim, because the Baruch Shalom gave Adam Arishon the wisdom to create the first fire. So it's sort of a weekly birthday celebration. We make a bracha on there. But that's because it belongs to Matzah Shabbos. Why is Besamim part of Havdalah? So again, we do know the Mishnah in Brachas Nun Aleph Beis that does mention the program for Havdalah and does say Besamim is one of the brachas. So we have Amunah in the Mishnah, we have to know why. So basically the reason that Taisus provides for us in Psachim, and it's also Taisus and Beya, that Matzah Shabbos, we are somewhat a little down, a little depressed. We don't like to be depressed, but there's something that we're missing because we just lost the Neshama Yisera. The Aruch HaShulchan writes that this is something that we could see and we could feel, that a person feels a little down on Matzah Shabbos. So what do you do when we need a little relief? So the Neshama is painting that it lost its counterpart, the Neshama Yisera. How do you relieve a neshama that we have? It doesn't respond to schnapps. It doesn't respond to an antidepressant. It's up to the Gemara in Brachis, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, and this is an important Gemara that we're going to use at the end of this year. How do you know you make a bracha? The regular bracha on the Samim. Senema Kol Anashama Halel Ka Eza Davash Anashama Nenis Be'ena Guf Nenis. Evidently, the neshama finds comfort with besamim. That's the refuah. That's the first aid for the neshama that's paining and agonizing because of the loss of the neshama yisera. So basically, that's why we take besamim on Matzai Shabbos, because our neshama sustained the loss of the neshama yisera. And besamim does the trick. And if you recall the Gemara in Brachas Nun Zayin and Beis, 3 things meishivin daitish al adam, and one of them is reyach. Reyach, don't forget, is a ruchni. The Rebbeinu Shalom is attributed to having a reyach nichayach from our karbonis. Reyach and ruchni. There's a lot to talk about that, but neshama appreciates reyach. So because the neshama lost the neshama yisera and it feels a little down, we take the B'samim Matzai Shabbos. It's noteworthy, the Rambam says that why do we take the B'samim? Because we lost the Shabbos. Now, you see, anybody who learns the Rambam's writings, the Rambam kept all metaphysical things out of halacha. Neshama yisera is not a physical thing, but we lost the Shabbos. That's something that we could all relate to. There is a shita of another cheshbon that actually Taisa says, the Bach says, because the Gehenim starts to burn on Matzai Shabbos, so we need something that brings more menucha. But be that as it may, and I want to make a point that I think is a brekel of Torah that will be very significant. In a certain sense, I could say that the Barei Minei Besamim is part of Havdalah, integral part of Havdalah. And I'll explain to you why. The Rambam says that Havdalah is part of the mitzvah of Kiddush, which seems like a contradiction in terms. Havdalah is part of Kiddush. Havdalah is the end of Shabbos. But the truth is, it's the greatest Kiddush, the greatest sanctification of Shabbos, when you make Havdalah and you say Hamavlu ben Kodesh L'chol. When you accentuate the difference between a Shabbos and a Matzai Shabbos, that highlights Kedusha Shabbos. And the Rambam explains that Havdalah is part of Kiddush because it highlights Kedusha Shabbos. So I'm allowed to add, there's no greater accentuation of Kedusha Shabbos than we take some of Matzai Shabbos, because we're in pain and anguish that we lost the Shabbos. We need first aid. We need relief. That shows the loss of Shabbos, also shows the greatness of Shabbos. The fact that we feel a little despondent on Matzai Shabbos shows what Shabbos is and shows the pain of the nefesh. So if I could say this, I would say that the bracha of Ner is a Matzai Shabbos mitzvah. It will soon see as man grama Matzai Shabbos. The bracha Besamim is a Havdalah mitzvah. It's part and parcel of Havdalah that's supposed to demonstrate the difference between Shabbos and Matzai Shabbos. So now that we have this brekel of Torah, let's apply this to the numerous shilas that come up. First of all, now we know why we take Besamim. Hopefully we're not depressed, but we do need a little of a boost. Our neshama certainly does, and we smell the besamim, so that gives relief. And the truth is, this is, in a certain sense, very much part of Havdalah, and therefore it would not be a hefsek. Now I'll tell you another brekel of Torah. Did you ever wonder why Chazal organized Havdalah just in that Seder, Gofen, Besamim, Ner, and then the last one is the bracha of Havdalah. So on a simple level, we could say, Tadav Shein Tadav. We eat or drink the most. Reyach is second. The bracha of an Or is once a week, and Havdalah. So maybe that's the order. It could be maybe a little more practical. If indeed we acknowledge that our neshama needs some relief, so why delay? First, you have to make a guffin, that's for sure. And then right away, get in the relief, get in the first aid. So do it as soon as possible. It could be a little deeper, as we explained. Because Besamim versus Ner, Besamim is more Havdalah than Ner. Ner is the Matzai Shabbos mitzvah. In fact, as we'll soon see, on Matzai Shabbos Shechal Tisha B'Av, we don't make Havdalah until Sunday night, if you recall. But we make the bracha of Ner right then and there on Matzai Shabbos, because that's a timely bracha. That's time sensitive. It's a Matzai Shabbos, but it's not Havdalah per se. In other words, the bracha of Besamim has more shaychis to Havdalah then does ner. But I'll tell you an interesting story. I saw this printed. I didn't write down where I saw it, but I saw it in a reliable sefer. The Ben Ish Chai, the famous Poisik, the Rav Polim, the Svardo Shegadol Hadar, was a 4-year-old child, and he asked his father, he wants to hold the ner during the Havdalah. And his father felt he was maybe too young for the job. So his father said, you know what, I'll ask you a question. If you get the answer, I'll give you the job. Why do we make Havdalah the order of Gafen, Besamim, Ner, and Havdalah? So the 4-year-old responded instantly, it's Pashit. We go in an ascending order. We drink with our mouths, so first is Gafen. We smell with our nose, that's second. We see with our eyes, and Havdalah is with our mind. So I imagine he got the job holding the Ner Havdalah. But I'll tell you something. Years later, after I saw this anecdote, I saw in the Sefer, Mamata Yehuda from Yehuda Ayash, one of the Gdolei Sfora, lived a few generations before the Ben Ish Chai, and Mamish says this exact Yisoid in the Mata Yehuda on our Simon, and says actually Rav Tzadik Vav, he says that the bracha goes in an ascending order, Mikal el Omoik, Mi'av el Dok, from a coarse hana to a more refined hana. As he explains, a person eats, he can only eat if he puts the food in his mouth. If it's not there, he won't enjoy it. Smelling, you could smell from a distance, you could smell from the kitchen. Eyes could see the stars. How far are the stars from our planet? And the mind is certainly the most edela, the most refined, the most sensitive chush that we have. So what the Ben Ish Chai was mechabed was actually the Mata Yehuda. Another point that it's right to mention is if a person by mistake said the bracha on ner first, don't change it, keep it, and smell, and then look at the ner, and afterwards you make a besamim. There's an order, but the order is not ma'akiv. And Mr. Burin, Simon Reish Tessif Vav says, keep it, don't change. Now this is really Hilchos bracha's issue, but the sheet of the Rambam is when a person made a bracha, he can't change it because the bracha was chal when he said the Shem. So when he said the Shem, he had in mind ner. You can't change it to Psamim, even Techtei Dibur. Now, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin like that, apparently. But why mess with success? If you made the bracha in there, that's good, keep it. You're going to end up reversing the order, but the order is not ma'akiv. But when you change the bracha, you get into a shayla according to the Rambam, you weren't even yotzit the bracha that you said. So better keep the way it is and don't change. Another interesting question, which someone asked me once, and obviously he didn't know the sugya. And he said, I'm in a camp, there's a few hundred boys, and it's a hassle to get the psamim. There's a few psamim, they pass it around. I'm not an aggressive fellow, I'm not a fighter. So if I don't get the psamim, big deal. And this is what his reasoning was. I don't drink from the wine of psamim, so why do I have to get from the psamim itself? But that's an oversight. He doesn't know the sugya. Because the wine of the Havdalah is no chiyuv to drink. It's a din of Havdalah al hayayin. In fact, there are times, the mashal of Bris and Yom Kippur, we make the brachas on a kais, we don't even drink it. So it's not so much the drinking as it is the holding of the kais. So you don't have to drink the wine. But besamim is just the opposite. It's a din on every individual to smell besamim matzoi Shabbos, to revive the neshama that's in pain. So it's nothing to do with the wine. The wine is one din, and the psamim is a totally different din that's really a chiyuv on every single person. Next point I wanted to mention is a fascinating nafkamina, and that is regarding women. There is a chiddush of the Bi'alacha in Reish Sadik Ches. The Bi'alacha says a tremendous chiddush that women are pata from the mitzvah of Birchas Haner. They do make Havdalah, but says the Bi'alacha, Havdalah they make because it's part of Kiddush. If they're chayiv in Kiddush, they're chayiv in Havdalah. But when it comes to the bracha of Ner, that's a Matzoi Shabbos mitzvah, and basically women are pata. It's a regular Zman Grama. Okay, Moshe says that's not the minig, and women do make the bracha of Ner, But one thing I will clarify, that this chiddush of the Bialachi is only regarding there. Regarding Besamim, there's no doubt about it that the bracha is chiyuv on men like women, because it's each individual that has this deficit in their simcha level, they need the Besamim to somehow lift that. This explains another unique halacha, and I'll tell you ma'aseh shahaya. Someone told me he was in a hospital. He was visiting a sick person. It was towards the end of Shabbos. And the person said, please do me a favor, make havdala for me. It's almost Shabbos, almost over. Make havdala for me. And the person said, I'll tell you the truth, I don't have any besamim. I don't have ner, and I don't want to not be yaitza havdala. And he left. But that was an oversight. It was lacking a little bit the mishkal hasidus of weighing one's priorities. Because the halacha is, and we'll soon see, the Shulchan Aruch says this, the Poskim say this, that if you don't have ner or besamim, you are yaitza havdala as it is. The main part of havdala, as Rabbi Garazman mentioned earlier, is the gafen, the kais, and the bracha mavdal. The ner and the besamim are not ma'akif. So what he should have done is made havdala, done a chesed for the Eid, made havdala without besamim and ner, and go home and make the bracha besamim and ner. It's as long as you do it on Motzei Shabbos. Now this is interesting that lamaisa, even though again you're supposed to put it into the havdala, but it's not ma'akif. So doing a yid chesed would outweigh the consideration of doing it as a full package. And basically what it should have done is made havdala and made the bracha later. Another question that I once heard, and I found this, the Shmir Shabbos has this exact shaila. Someone came home from Shul Motzei Shabbos a little absent-mindedly, and he saw something on the table, and he picked it up and made a bracha, and he smelled it. I guess he was always focused on making brachas on Shabbos to get meir brachas, and he saw something, why not? And then he realized, Gevald, what did I do? I didn't yet make havdalah. So now he's in a quandary. He didn't make havdalah. He already made a bracha, bar made a besamim. So the good news is he had in mind just to smell, and that's it, not to smell any further. So if we'd ask a Rav, the Rav would say, okay, so that means the bracha only went on this. So probably you could make another bracha during havdalah, because the bracha you said on the first besamim only covered that initial smelling. You didn't have in mind for the next hour. So basically, the bracha is chal. Fine. Question, of course, is now when he makes havdalah for his family, can he again make the bracha bar mina besamim? And the answer is no. Because once he smelled, he was yaitza, the objective of making besamim on Motzei Shabbos. He can make another bracha as a bracha bar mina besamim, which is a berchas hanenin, very nice, but not during havdalah. That would be a regular berchas hanenin during havdalah, which would constitute a hefsek. And that's why such a case, he would not be allowed to make the bracha besamim as part of the regular text. So someone else in the family would have to make the bracha, but that's certainly not his option. Now, what's interesting is, Rav Shlomo Zalman in the Shmir Shabbos says what he could do is he could make the hinek el shuasi, and before you make the gafen, the first bracha on his program for this evening will be Borei Minei Besamim. And then he'll resume the regular havdalah. So, because then he doesn't lose. Then he has a regular besamim, and although it's not part of havdalah per se, but it's not a hefsek. So basically what he did is he changed the seder of havdalah. Yes, his family will never forget this havdalah, a memorable havdalah for his besamim and then gafen, but then he avoided all issues. Next question that I wanted to deal with, an important question, is when a person basically does not make havdalah in the right time. And what do I mean to say? Let's say a person made havdalah during the summer in Europe, and this is a very common shaila in Europe, where Shabbos is over very, very late, especially some parts of that country, those countries, the Shabbos can end even 12:30, 1 o'clock. And people are disciplined in Europe. They go to sleep early. So the emphasis in Reish Tzadik Gimel, the Shulchan Aruch has an option of making an early Havdalah, which basically means on Shabbos, you can't use the Ner, but you make the regular Havdalah, and after that Havdalah, you're allowed to eat, and even though it's still Shabbos, but you yaitz Havdalah. Like we make early Kiddush, it's an option of an early Havdalah. Now, the Shulchan Aruch does not recommend doing it because it's confusing, because you might can't do malacha. But at the end of the day, this Havdalah does work in certain instances. The question is, when a person makes this early Havdalah, does he use Ner and does he use Besamim? So that the Shulchan Aruch says clearly, Reish Tzadik Tes, you don't use Ner. You can't, you're not allowed to light a fire. The question is, why? Teretz is Pashut, it's Chilul Shabbos, and also, it's not the time for it, it's not Matzoi Shabbos. Do you use Besamim, Zok the Rav, and Reish Tzadik Tes, early Havdalah, you don't use Besamim either. Apparently, he held, and I could understand that since the need for the Besamim is because of the ending of Shabbos, he didn't end Shabbos yet, so why should he take Besamim? However, I must mention the Pri Megadim Reish Tzadik Tes twice says that he makes the Havdalah, not on there, but it does use Besamim. Evidently, since it's part of the Havdalah program and it doesn't involve any Chilul Shabbos, why not? Now you might wonder, but he's not in pain. Shabbos is still here. But then again, he made Havdalah. So he is, in a certain sense, switching his location. So perhaps for that reason, there would be a reason actually to make this bracha on Besamim. So it's interesting that the Rav says not to, the B'mgadman says you could. It might be kedai to make from a Matzoi Shabbos again when it comes to right Zman, because that for sure there's no chashash of bracha levatala. But definitely we see an interesting question where the halacha takes a twist when the Havdalah becomes divided between Ner and the actual Havdalah. The halacha is if someone did not make Havdalah on Matzoi Shabbos, he can make Havdalah until Tuesday morning. The question is when he does make Havdalah till not on Matzoi Shabbos, Sunday morning, does he also make the Besamim bracha on Sunday morning? So one thing is clear, when you make a late Havdalah, Sunday on, you don't make the bracha of Ner. Because Ner is a Matzoi Shabbos mitzvah, and basically you don't make a bracha Sunday morning on Matzoi Shabbos mitzvah. But the question is, do you make the bracha of Besamim in the Sunday morning Havdalah? So the poskim seem to be clear that no, you can't. For some reason, the Besamim Havdalah is a Matzoi Shabbos, limited to Matzoi Shabbos, and not Sunday morning. I never really fully understood that because a person needs the relief, so who cares if he slept overnight? He's still missing the Shabbos. But apparently he got used to it, or as Oilas Shabbos says that Lamaisa, this is a Matzoi Shabbos mitzvah, and Sunday morning he cannot make the Besamim during Havdalah. You might say, what do you care? It's a regular Berchas Hananen, same Yisoid. If it's not needed in the Havdalah, it would qualify as a bracha livatola. So basically we see that the Havdalah has a beautiful connection to it, and we have to just know how to field each question individually. The truth is, Sunday morning, a person can make Havdalah, and after Havdalah, he finished, he can make the bracha Besamim, there's no problem. But beyond that, we can't do. Another question is, do you all hear me? Hello?
We hear the Rav loud and clear.
Good, okay, fine. Fine, good. Make sure.
Loud and clear.
Good.
Perfect, Rebbe.
Good. Okay. Next question is another important question. And that is...
Only, again, don't get too close to the screen because then we don't see you.
There's a different thing on my screen now. I don't know why it's there. Join a live Zoom demo. For some reason, I don't see anything, but as long as you see me. You know anything about that?
Mordechai, can you tell the Rav how to get rid of that? I don't know exactly what the problem is.
It's an advertisement. Join a live Zoom demo. And okay, it's
No,
blocking host.
chas v'sholom. So Rabbi Shapiro can tell you how to get rid of that. Maybe.
Go ahead.
Not really. He'd have to call Rabbi Jaffe.
Okay, I don't mind as long as you hear me. Fine.
Click
But let's
something.
move on. We have a big agenda. Fine. Terrific. Okay. Next question is, if someone does not have Besamim handy, does he have to go after it, or just Havdalah is good without it? So this we know is a Gemara. The Gemara says, although ner or is part of Havdalah, but a mechazrin HaRav, a person doesn't have to go after it. And if it's difficult, he can be yaitz without it. The truth is, as we said, we do make this division. We make Havdalah Sunday night on Matzoi Tisha B'Av, Matzoi Yom Kippur, Matzoi Tisha B'Av, but the ner is Matzoi Shabbos. So we see that Havdalah and ner are not necessarily related. And therefore, if someone doesn't have it, he doesn't have it. If he gets it later, fine. If he doesn't get it, he's also yaitz at Havdalah. The Gemara does not specifically discuss if someone doesn't have Besamim, what to do. However, the Rosh in Perek Ches and Siman Gimel in Masechta Brachos says, Ein machzirin, when you don't have a ner, you don't have to go after it because it's not ma'akiv. Ukol shkein al besamim de'einu el lahashbis nafsha. Says the Rosh that if you don't have besamim, you certainly don't have to go to a next door neighbor and borrow besamim because it's not ma'akiv. Now it's interesting, because if I were to ask you, which should you go the extra mile more for the ner or for the besamim? So mitzad echad, I would say the ner is more of a ruchniistic thing. You're not enjoying it. It's kulei Hashem. Maybe the besamim is just a pleasure, so you can live without it. I would have thought just the opposite. Since besamim highlights in a very drastic way, very dramatic way, the greatness of Shabbos, maybe you should go after the besamim, because that's part of Havdalah, as we said earlier. But the Rosh doesn't say that. And the Rosh says that the halacha is you don't have to go after the besamim if you don't have it. And that's basically the halacha. If you don't have besamim, make Havdalah without besamim. Like I told you earlier, the person in the hospital should have done the mitzvah for the chayla, and he'll get besamim when he comes home. And if he doesn't get it, still yaitze anyhow. Now, but here is an interesting point. The besamim is not ma'akiv, but the Oiskim, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Ari quoting Arizal, actually, and Kaf HaChaim quotes Arizal, that Lamaisa one should make an effort to get besamim, and maybe that's like we said, because it's something important for the person. It's something that highlights Shabbos, Kedusha Shabbos in a very dramatic way. But basically, there's no. If you don't have it, you could be yaitza, but it's nice to go the extra mile. The Chazei Nish in a sefer writes a very interesting description of this unique halacha, a mechazrin HaRav, something this is a chiyuv, but you don't have to go the extra mile to get it. So it's not something that's voluntary, but something is absolutely a part of Havdalah. But if you don't have it, you could be yaitza without it. And now we come to another beautiful part of the sugya, and that is when don't we use the besamim in Havdalah? There's Yom Kippur, there's a Tisha B'Av, there's Yom Tiv. So one thing I could say is easy to deal with, and that is the question of when do we take the ner? Sometimes contrast is very illuminating. The ner is very simple. The ner Havdalah you make every Matzai Shabbos, period, unconditionally. I could almost say that the ner is 52 times a year. And you know, Bayavdel, the word Vav Yud Beis Dalet Lamed is Havdalah, and it's 52, Gematria. 52 weeks a year you use the ner. And the reasoning is very pashut, because it has nothing to do with anything but Matzai Shabbos. Ner is a Matzai Shabbos mitzvah. If you make an Havdalah Matzai Shabbos, even Matzai Shabbos going into Pesach like we had this year, or going into Shavuos that we have sometimes, you always make the bracha of ner unconditionally. The question is, do you make the bracha of besamim on a Shabbos? Yeah. Do you make a Havdalah on something, when you make on Yom Tiv, do you make Havdalah? So one thing I will say, the easiest to deal with is is a regular mitzvah Yom Tiv. Thank you very much. And we're back to normal. So on a regular mitzvah Yom Tiv, you do not use besamim. The question is, why not? We're losing the Yom Tiv. So Taisa seems to suggest that Yom Tiv doesn't have a Neshama Yisrael. Now, we're not minimizing the greatness of Yom Tiv, but Neshama Yisrael is an exclusively Shabbos privilege. It's not Yom Tiv. We don't have Chalent on Yom Tiv. We don't have a Neshama Yisrael. Let's put it at a simple level. If there's no Neshama Yisrael, there's no loss of Matzah Yom Tiv. So on a Tuesday night, Matzah Yom Tiv, you make Havdalah. You don't use Ner because it's not Matzah Shabbos, and you don't use Samim as well. I swear, you to tell me B'Shem Desfas Emes that a different reading, because there's a fundamental difference between Shabbos and Yom Tiv. Shabbos, the Kedusha is Kri V'Kaima. Yom Tiv, we make the Kedusha. So Desfas Emes said, the Shabbos gift you got as a gift. So after Shabbos, you lose it. Yom Tiv, you created the Kedushas Yom Tiv. You made it. If you made it, you keep it. He says you do have an Neshama Yisrael, but you don't lose it. But either way you look at it, there's no B'samim on a regular Matzoi Yom Tiv, and that's Pashut. Tricky question is Matzoi Shabbos that goes into Yom Tiv. We just had Pesach, we had Erev Pesach al Shabbos, and then we went into Yom Tiv. Matzoi Shabbos by the Seder, we made Havdalah, Kiddush, and Havdalah. So when you have a Matzoi Shabbos going into a Yom Tiv, do you make the bracha of Boyer Minei B'samim? So you might say, listen, it's a regular Matzoi Shabbos. I'm losing the Neshama Yisrael. And especially like Tais that a Yom Tiv does not have a Neshama Yisrael. So you're going from a Neshama Yisrael to a loss of it. Why should you make the bracha of Boyer Minei B'samim? However, says Taisvis that Lamaisa, you're going into a Suda, and basically that brings you comfort. Now, the Paiskim explain, it doesn't mean that you're eating, so therefore you're fine. Because in every Matzoi Shabbos, why do you eat Samim? You're having Malava Malka. It means the mitzvah of Sudas Yom Tov that you will experience very soon. So basically, on a Matzoi Shabbos, like we just had this year, Shabbos going into Pesach, it's often Matzoi Shabbos is Shavuos, so you go from Shabbos into Shavuos Lamashal. There is no B'samim taken, even though it's Matzoi Shabbos. So Ner, yes, and B'samim not. Once saw an interesting cheshbon, maybe it's even more pashut. Where do we have Matzoi Shabbos going into Yom Tiv? At the first night of Pesach, we had Shavuos. Imagine someone would call help on Matzoi Shabbos when it's going into the Seder night or going to Shavuos night. Very inappropriate. You need help now. This is the day of all days. This is Pesach. This is Shavuos. So by taking B'samim, it's a bezayin of the oncoming Yom Tiv. You need help? You have Yom Tiv. What are you getting nervous about? For whatever reasoning it is, we never take on Matzoi Shabbos Shechal B'Yom Tiv. Matzoi Shabbos Chol HaMoed, Pesach or Sukkos is simple. True, you're going into Chol HaMoed, which is a quasi Yom Tiv, but it's not a full Yom Tiv. And therefore, you're going from Shabbos into Chol, even though it's albeit Chol HaMoed, but on a regular Matzoi Shabbos Chol HaMoed, of course, we do take B'samim. Now, this comes up an issue is Pesach, Chol HaMoed, Shabbos Chol HaMoed Pesach. I want to just mention some people are wary about taking the regular B'samim. They're concerned about chametz, so they don't use B'samim at all. We can understand where they're coming from. Don't forget, B'samim is not ma'akiv. Some people buy special B'samim, they put away the Pesach, which is nice for the first year. But don't forget, B'samim does not have a lifetime contract. Sometimes the smell of it dissipates and it no longer has a smell. So making a bracha on that would be a bracha of Havdalah. So make sure you know that it still has the fragrance that it's supposed to have. Matzoi Shabbos Tisha B'Av. Let's put things in perspective. We go from Shabbos into Tisha B'Av, that happens quite often, is the perfect time to use B'samim. Because we're leaving a Shabbos and we're going into Tisha B'Av, nothing less than Tisha B'Av. We need great relief. And therefore, it should be the most appropriate time to use B'samim. However, the Rishonim say, the Mordechai and the Goyz Maimoni, the Avudram, the Beis Yosef quotes them, B'samim on Tisha B'Av is inappropriate. B'samim is something of an extravagant pleasure, And Tisha B'Av is a time that we refrain from any pleasures. Therefore, although in theory we should use Psamim on Matzoi Shabbos Tisha B'Av, the minig is not to. So we have a very interesting Havdalah Matzoi Shabbos Tisha B'Av. Matzoi Shabbos we only make Ner. Sunday night we make Havdalah, and Besamim is left out entirely. Matzoi Yom Kippur is a different issue, and that is because Mitzad Echad, the question is Matzoi Yom Kippur. Maybe we shouldn't take Besamim like we don't do on Matzoi Tisha B'Av, but that's wrong, because Tisha B'Av is the saddest day of the year. Yom Kippur, says the Mishnah in Seif Tainus, is the happiest day of the year. Like Yom Tovim B'Yisrael, Ki Yom Kippurim. So it's not a day of Avelis and Besamim. We do take during the day to make brachas. So it would fit into the theme of Matzoi Yom Kippur. But there's a different question, a fundamental question. Does Yom Kippur have an Neshama Yisera? If we could prove Yom Kippur has an Neshama Yisera, so Matzoi Yom Kippur would warrant a Besamim. If Yom Kippur is the holiest, the happiest and holiest day, albeit, but if it's not Neshama Yisera, then there's no reason for the Barimina Besamim. I'll say, be a sport, just throw it in. You can't do that. If it doesn't belong, it's going to be a hefsek in your guffen. So basically, the Rishonim discussed this, and it seems the consensus of Poskim is that at regular Yom Kippur, Matzoi Yom Kippur, we don't make a bracha on Besamim. Yom Kippur is a very holy day, no doubt about that, but it doesn't have a Neshama Yisera. Neshama Yisera seems to be an exclusively Shabbos gift. So on a Matzoi Yom Kippur, it's interesting. Even during the week, Matzoi Yom Kippur, on a weeknight, we make Ner for a different reason. Ner Shabbos, I'm sure you learned that. We will learn it. But Besamim is left out from a regular Matzoi Yom Kippur Havdalah. The tricky question is when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos. So now you have 2 days in one, Yom Kippur and Shabbos. You might reason, forget about Yom Kippur. Dal Mihachi Yom Kippur. Shabbos always requires a Besamim. So Yom Kippur Shechal B'Shabbos, we should at least take Besamim for the Shabbos Shabbat. And this is a much more significant machlokes Rishonim with great Rishonim on both sides of the argument. And at the end of the day, there's no clear-cut achrod. Shulchan Aruch seems to say that we don't make a bracha on Matzoi Yom Kippur Shechal B'Shabbos. The Poskim do say the mitzvah have the minig yes. Some make a chilik of making the Besamim at home. You could say it in shul. You don't say it. But this is something we'll say maracha, mul maracha. It depends on minig, your particular minig, which is the right minig, the one that you follow, because your minig is the right minig. But basically, Yom Kippur Shechal B'Shabbos is a real toss-up, so to speak. What is the right course of action? Should you make the bracha on the Besamim or not? Either it's right or wrong. Either it's necessary or hefsek. So you're basically running a pretty risky decision when you have to decide. So let me tell you something very unusual. I haven't seen something like this in a long time. The HaRav, one of the early Poskim in Eretz Yisrael, lived a number of years ago. He was an Enikol Cham Seifa. He authored Svarim. His children wrote Svarim, in fact. He wrote to Rabbi Yashiv the following Shaila, and it's all printed in Rabbi Yashiv Seifa in Kovetz Tshuvas Siman Chelik Aleph Siman Lamed Gimel. He wrote that I had a dream, and I asked you, Rabbi Yashiv, a question that I was struggling with. What should we do on Matzoi Yom Kippur Shechal B'Shabbos? Make or not to make? Should we make the bracha B'Samim or not? I would love to make the bracha B'Samim, but it might be a hefsek in my Havdalah. So I had a great idea. And I asked you what you think of the idea. He writes to Rabbi Yashiv, before you start Havdalah, you make the bracha B'Samim and you smell it, and have das, you're going to smell it soon. Then you could start the Havdalah, and after Bar Pri HaGafen, you pause. Don't make another gafen, just smell it, and then go weiter. So this way, you smuggled in smelling during the Havdalah, so you did the whole package, without running a risk of a bracha levatala or hefsek, because at the end of the day, you didn't make a new bracha on the Besamim, you had used the old bracha. So he asked Rabbi Yashiv, he writes, can I make the bracha before, smell it during, so I don't run a risk of hefsek, and I accomplished all that I wanted accomplished. And then he writes, sort of, that my dream turned into a nightmare when I woke up and I didn't yet receive a response from you. What's the answer? So Rabbi Yashiv, the great person that he was, he says, I'm really busy these days. I don't have too much time to answer questions. But the way he described me, this is a desperate situation, and I will respond. And Rabbi Yashiv, in a few lines, he says, it still might be a problem of a hefsek. Where's the hefsek? He didn't say anything unnecessary. Says Rabbi Yashiv that maybe this maisa smelling, the maisa haracha, the smelling would be a hefsek between the gafen and the subsequent drinking. That's Rabbi Yashiv writes. Even there's no bracha, but the maisa smelling would be a hefsek. Now, I would like to add, I'm surprised, I don't know why Rabbi Yashiv didn't mention, maybe he was just trying to be brief, but I found another place that we find that merely smelling something might constitute a hefsek. And that is another unprecedented little shtickle, a little vertical of Torah that I want to share with you. The Chassam Sofer, as we know, was the prime Talmud of the great Nosson Adler. In Siman Kuf Yud, Hilchos HaDerech, he writes that on Narach that discusses when you make Hilchos HaDerech, it's appropriate, it's advisable, not a chiyah, but advisable, before you say Hilchos HaDerech, to make a bracha on a food, make a bracha achrayna, and go from the bracha into the Hilchos HaDerech to have a bracha smucha l'chaverta. So typically people eat, make a bar nefashis or bar michya, and right into the Hilchos HaDerech. So Nosson Adler, so the Chassam Sofer records his illustrious Rebbe of Nosson Adler's minig, who would not eat. He made a bracha bar mina psamim and then smelled it and right away went into Hilchos HaDerech. Now this is not typical of Chassam Sofer. He takes issue with his Rebbe's psak. And Zok Chassam Sofer on the Gilyon and Kuf Yud and Orach Chayim, I'm afraid if you do that, the smelling will be a hefsek between the bracha and the subsequent Tfilas HaDerech. So what Rabbi Yashiv said, matter-of-factly, that a smelling is a hefsek, as a source in the Chassam Sofer. But the HaRav's suggestion might be based on the Nosson Adler's analysis. He held smelling is not a hefsek. Maybe it's not as significant enough a ma'isa. So this question is interesting, what to do on Matzah Yom Kippur. Some make the bracha, some don't, and we have this option, which is questionable. And the question is the smelling considered a hefsek or not? Let me share with you another fascinating brekela of Torah, which is unfortunately negayed to many people in this time of history, where people lost their sense of smell and haven't regained it, as Rabbi Goddesman mentioned. And the question is, people that are bali mishpacha, are heads of households who make havdalah, what do they do about the bracha besamim? Now, the truth is, of course, you say, well, it's not ma'akiv, but we have it, we have to do it. Should someone else make it? Or here's an interesting question. Why have someone else make it? The halacha is that a berachas ha-mitzvah that I do, I can make a bracha and be yoyt to you. But it goes even further than that. If you can't make the bracha for some reason, I can make a bracha just for you. That's the din of arvus. I could make a bracha just for you. So now the question is, the person that doesn't smell, he wants to make havdalah. He's the father. But how can you make a bracha if you can't smell? That's a bracha of havdalah. Maybe since we'll look at the whole havdalah as one big berachas ha-mitzvahs, he'll make the whole havdalah, including the psamim, to be moitzi his family. So even though he has no shaychus to the psamim, but he's making it for the family. So one thing I must tell you is pashut. If someone doesn't smell at all, he typically cannot make a bar mitzvah psamim. If he smells slightly, he has a slight sense of smell, that I found the Birchas Habayis writes of Vav Lamed Hey, that since even Hana Mu'etes requires a bracha, so even a person only regained a partial sense of smell, he has a very faint sense of smell, that's enough to make a bracha. Some people don't have a strong sense of smell, but there's something there, that would justify the bracha. We're talking about someone that has no sense of smell at all. So the Mechaba, in the end of our Simon, Reish Tzadik Zayin discusses this question, and it seems to agree to the Eitzah. On a regular Tuesday morning, he can't make a berchas reyach because he doesn't smell. But on Matzoi Shabbos, he's doing it for his family. It's a din of arvis of yotz, of something like yotza moitzi, and therefore he can make the bracha. However, the Mishnah Berurah writes a very strong lashon, kol achreinim cholken al zeh. And obviously, we understand where that Mishnah Berurah is coming from. Of course, a berchas ha-mitzvah, like Kiddush, I can make just for you, even though I'm not drinking or eating. But Besamim is a berchas hanenin. It's a very important berchas hanenin. It's a very integral to Havdalah, but it's still a berchas hanenin, and it has the status of berchas hanenin. So how could a person that doesn't have a sense of smell, which the Pais referred to as a toisron, how could a toisron make a bracha to exempt the family? It's a berchas hanenin. And just like a person can make a shakal if he's not drinking, he can't make a nanan if he's not enjoying the fragrance of the besamim. However, Re'ez HaPela, one of the Rishonim, the Orches Chayim, right, leaves a cryptic message about this question. And I quote his lashon, in Havdalah Ois Ches, he says, even though the person, the Toisran, cannot smell, but he doesn't realize, but he is benefiting from the besamim. Now, this sounds sort of like a mystery. Well, what does that mean? He has no sense of smell. So how could why is the bracha borim of some Matzoi Shabbos any different? So let me share with you a beautiful brekah that I saw in two of the Gedolei Achrayim, the Halachas Ketanos and the Tshuvas Shvus Yaakov. Both were mechavan to the identical analysis of our sugya. And they ask a different question. We started with the Gemara that was shocking. The Gemara says, what is the hana that only the neshama has hana? Ve'ein aguf nene, hevi oim ezer reach. Fragt the Welt. Everybody learns more asks, what do you mean? We live in a world, there's an industry of millions of dollars on fragrances and colognes and perfumes and deodorants. And people enjoy reach. What are you talking about? Ve'ein aguf nene? How could the Gemara make such a statement that doesn't seem to be true? Says the Shvus Yaakov and the Halachas Ketanos, and presumably that's the pshat of the Orches Chaim that we mentioned, that the Gemara is saying that there is a hana to the neshama, even if the guf doesn't smell. A toisran who has no chusha reach, he doesn't enjoy the physical aspect, but his neshama does find comfort in the besamim. And the Gemara is saying that hana is so significant that on Matzoi Shabbos we make a bracha on that. And therefore, listen to this. If someone has no sense of smell on a Tuesday, he can't make a bracha. But on Matzoi Shabbos, he makes a bracha for himself because his neshama finds solace and comfort in the besamim. Because even though his physical senses don't smell, his neshama does perceive the relief of the besamim. So in other words, says the Shvus Yaakov and the Halachas Ketanos, the Gemara is talking about a person that has no sense of smell and allowing him to make a bracha on Matzoi Shabbos as part of Havdalah. Isn't that beautiful? This Gemara is discussing our issue. So not because he's moitzi his family, because that doesn't work. It's a berchas hanenin. But the berchas hanenin is sufficient for this person's neshama. And they both umachavan to the same distinction, and they both caution. If a person has a healthy sense of smell, but his nose is terribly stuffed and nothing goes up his nose, then he can't make a bracha Matzoi Shabbos because the neshama doesn't eat the thing because it doesn't go up through the nostril. They're assuming, and the Shvus Yaakov said he spoke to a doctor, obviously an ENT, that when a person's nose is stuffed, nothing goes up, and therefore the neshama doesn't have hana. But a person that has a clear passage, he doesn't have that sense of smell, the neshama does benefit, and that would qualify for a brachas hanenin that the person has. You'll ask me, let's say a person has a very weak heart, and he survives on his heart medication. It's the most important thing in his life. But you don't make a bracha on that. Make a bracha on foods, right? So why do you make a bracha on this hanas of the neshama? The answer is that's the chiddush of the Gemara. The Gemara is saying that Eiz Adav Shasham Nel Guf means even if it's only the neshama, the guf could make a bracha. It's a berachas hanenin. Heart medication is not an hanoah in that sense of the word, but this is an hanoah gashmi that the neshama perceives. Now this is an incredible chiddush because the emes, I saw the chita, learns the Gemara on a simple level. The Gemara means, of course, the guf has hanoah, but it's not a full-fledged hanoah like eating or drinking. It's more of a ruchni type of hanoah. But that doesn't justify making a bracha when the guf has no hana at all. So this is a beautiful chiddush, but let me be very clear. We follow the Mishnah Berurah's psak. Pamboy said he's our paisik. So although this would explain the Archas Chayim, it explains the Gemara brachis, but halacha, the minig is that a person that's a taisran cannot smell, should not make the bracha b'samim, even matzai Shabbos. He should give it to one of the family members. Could even be a woman if there's no one else home. It's fine. It's the same berachas hanenim, and that we might see the people. Just heard
Which one is it? I wasn't clear. Is it the way the Rav explained it? It's the neshama being happy that the guf is nena, or is
the neshama is finding comfort,
or is it fakert that the guf is taket nena because the neshama is uplifted? Why can't it be that way?
Why can we look at?
I feel happy. My psyche is feeling happy. My guf is feeling happy.
That would not be a physical. That would not be a nenen berachas hanenim bracha. If you won the lottery, you don't make a bracha on very many psalmim. There has to be a connection between the hana and the person. The hana of the reyach, not the good feeling. It's not relief. It's even
though the good feeling is connected to a reyach, it's not strong enough.
It has to be something more specific.
More specific.
Now, let me tell you two more points. One point about the person that's a person who cannot make a bracha. So someone asked me who has this shaila. So his son makes the bracha. Can he answer amen to his son's bar mitzvah psalm? Now, this is another beautiful question, because the truth is, for him, psalm is not on the program. See, I'm saying amen to someone else's bracha. Maybe that's like saying a bracha on lightning during a psalm, during Havdalah, and that might be a hefsek between his guffin and his drinking. But the emes is, I thought that really the person is chayiv in psalm, but he's unable to smell. He's an oinus. But someone told me just yesterday that Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky told someone who lost the sense of smell not to answer amen. Now, this is a chiddush to me, because we all, I'm sure, know the famous Torah, if when her husband makes kiddush on Yom Tiv, and he makes shechianu, but his wife makes shechianu by neighbors, does she make the amen to his shechianu? And the Paiskim, Moshe says yes, because it's part of being the kiddush. So here also, the psalm is part of the Havdalah, unless Rav Shmuel held that the woman's chayiv in shechianu, but she made it earlier, but she's chayiv in it. But the Taisran, who has the inability to smell, has no chiyav of besamim. So maybe it's worse. So I'll leave that as a tzarachian. Let me leave you with one more shaila that's negayah me on a personal level. I'm in a camp and yeshiva, so we have this 12 months a year. In the yeshiva, in a camp, we have a big oilam kanayin har, a few hundred b'nei Torah, and the problem always is that people can't get to the besamim. You could buy 20, 50 bottles, if you have 450 b'nei Torah, you can't get so much besamim. So the question is, what's the eitzah? So as Rabbi Garzman mentioned, I wanted to highlight that point. The Mishnah Berurah is emphatic about it and says, don't concentrate on the besamim, because the main thing is to hear the bracha ma'avdu mikodesh l'chayil. That's the only thing that's ma'akiv. And people are busy trying to access the besamim during the bracha of Havdalah. So the maniach hasa'ikah, they're not yotz Havdalah, but they have besamim. So it's a terrible lack of priorities. That's what Mishnah Berurah writes, which Rabbi Garzman read to you on the screen. But I wanted to add, I once saw in a pretty reliable sefer, I mean, I can't say, I don't know which sefer is purely reliable, but this is pretty reliable, that when the Chavetz Chaim made Havdalah in his yeshiva, he omitted the bracha b'samim. He'd do it later, because he was afraid of just such a problem, which would stem with what he writes in Mishnah Berurah. Again, might be true and might not be true, but the attitude is, don't be busy getting b'samim during the actual Havdalah. So the question is, which many times when they ask me, is they couldn't get it, and they're not fighters, and they get it after the Mavdil finishes and drinks the wine, which is the time to look for the psalmim. Do they make a new bracha on the psalmim? Let me put things in perspective. The Mavdil said, Hinigal Shuasi, Gafen, Besamim, Ner, Havdalah, and drank. Now, approximately 3 minutes later, he finally got the besamim, and he wants to smell it. Can he still use the besamim bracha that he heard as part of the Havdalah? Well, now all this in between was a hefsik in the bracha. He had a mind to use the bracha, but it's a hefsik. So this Rav Shlomo Zalman discusses in a beautiful piece in the Shmir Shabbos in Samach Aleph Chaf Aleph, and his initial reaction is hefsik, but then again, the mavdil is even more of a hefsik. The mavdil makes a guffen, and then makes samim, and then makes ner, and then makes the mavdil, and only later does he drink. And yet, since that's part of Havdalah, so there's no hefsik in the package of Havdalah. So why can we apply that to the one of the listeners that everything in between was the package of Havdalah that I need, so it wouldn't be a hefsik? As Rav Shlomo Zalman, with his very analytical mind, there's a chilik. Because if you follow the program and you do it as prescribed, you're good. But this Bach is innovative. He's smelling the besamim after the barei, after drinking. That's not part of the program. It's not part of the schedule. So you can't transfer bracha to a location that's after Havdalah. But then he says that we find that might not be true. And this is the Beferish Mechaber. This happens when you have younger children that are not so obedient. You say, let's wash Kindlech at Shabbos. You have to wash between Kiddush. You're not supposed to be mafsik between Kiddush and washing. And they tell the children, they don't listen. So they say, this week I'm washing. I'm not waiting for anybody. You don't wash now. I'm making a moitzi. You're going to have to be on your own. So one child's a little bit of a chutzif and a little tamachacham. He says, fine. He waits for the father to wash. Make a moitzi. He's yoy to the father's moitzi. And the Mechaber says in Kuf Samach Zayin, after he hears the father's moitzi, you're allowed to go wash, make it until Sedayim, and then eat the challah. Because the washing and the brach is not a hefsik between the father's moitzi and his subsequent eating, because you can't eat without washing. Now, of course, the boy's a mechutiv, but he was right. Because since you can eat without washing, the washing and the Sedayim is not a hefsik between the moitzi that took place 2 minutes earlier. So there you see that maybe it does work if you put in your own ideas, as long as it's something that's needed. So Lamaisa, I tell the Baruch, and I hope I'm right, Rabbi Gazman, please correct me if I'm wrong. What they should do is that when they listen to the bracha initially, they should make it tonight. If I will get the besamim during the actual Havdalah, so the bracha is good, I want to lie in that bracha. If I get it first afterwards, and as Rav Zalman says, it's a suffik bracha, I make another bracha, I want to have a mind not to be yaitza with the bracha that I heard, and then I'll make my own bracha, the chatchila l'chaladeis. I'll say, well, who are you playing games with? You're listening to a bracha, and you're making the tonight, and you're making the bracha again. But that for Talmid Chacham is pashut. That's svira. Daf peit esiv gimel. A person could say svira without a bracha and make it tonight. If I will afterwards count later bisman, I'll make a bracha. If not, I won't make a bracha. You could. Vad Yosef says if you see a levana that's not so clear, and you're a svad, you like to wait for perfect levana, you might miss it. You could listen to your friend saying the bracha, the bracha of the kiddush levana tonight. If I get a better levana later, I want to disregard that and make my own. So you're allowed to listen and make your own bracha later. Would that be an option? Now I'll hear from my brother. God, thank you very much all for listening.